All right, and we're back. I've been trying to do more of these videos, but haven't had a whole lot of chance to set up the home studio, so I'm just gonna keep knocking some of these out in the car whenever I get a chance. And I want to talk to you today, if I can get this straightened out. I want to talk to you about stress. Stress is not always bad. Stress can be good. Stress can be a very good thing. We need stress. We need stress. This idea that somehow, you can go through life completely living stress-free is just not true. Just not accurate. We need some stress just to live, okay, to do good things in life. But today I want to talk to you about how to manage stress and how to actually make it work for you instead of against you. I want you to be healthy. I want you to live a good life. That's what this channel, what my work is all about. I want you to be fit, I want you to eat healthy, and I want you to use good wellness principles. Do those three things to just live a healthy life. That's what my YouTube channel is about. That's what my training is about. That's what everything I do is about. So with this first video, I want to talk to you about what exactly is stress, and then we'll get into, in the second video, how to manage it. We're going to talk in this video about kind of the good parts of stress, the bad parts, and then in the second video I'll give you some actual techniques you can use to really dig down and start improving your ability to deal with stress. Because I want you to be stronger. By the end of these two videos, I want you to be stronger as a person. Let's talk first of all about a progress paradox. A progress paradox. Okay, around the year 1850, about 170 years ago, not that long ago, less than 2 centuries ago, 85% of the population lived in poverty. 85%. Now, fast forward from 1850 to 2019, only about 10% of the U.S. population lives in poverty. So what you've seen during that time of economic progress is, since the 60s and 70s, particularly in the United States, since that time, wealth has gone way up, but happiness has also gone down. So what does that tell you? That tells you that there's a paradox, okay? We've been progressing in some ways. We've been making more money, earning more money. We've been doing better economically, but that we've also created problems for ourselves. We've created issues. And those issues are very complex, but it's a paradox. It's a bit of a paradox. I mean, think about shoes, for example. I personally, I probably own 15 pairs of shoes. And 100 years ago, the average person was lucky to own more than one. If you had a good pair of shoes, you were doing well. And now we have many pairs of shoes, okay? So we have a lot of consumer items. Consumer items have become cheaper over time. But that doesn't mean necessarily that we're not living in more stressful times, because stress is relative. It's relative to the situation. So we are essentially living in that progress paradox in a time period that is characterized by a stress epidemic. Okay, a stress epidemic. And the reason for that is because modern life is so disconnecting, that the social connections that people in 1850 or even 100, heck, even 50, 60 years ago, the connections that people had socially, those connections are, if not completely gone, they're severely stressed. So you see a lot of social isolation, you see a lot of social problems in the United States. So we see that economic growth, but we also see a decline in social cohesion. And this is somewhat relative to our country, but it's also reflective of what's happening across the globe with these forces of globalism, these forces of a very networked economy across the world. We're seeing the obliteration of what has always provided psychological, spiritual, material security for people, which was relationships and community. Okay, so we're seeing a huge amount of stress related to that. For example, I'll just read off a couple stats real quick. We spend about $500 billion per year on mental health problems in the United States, and that number is actually growing. 25% of Americans struggle with depression. The number of people who live alone is the highest it's ever been. And loneliness and isolation, social isolation, is highly related to the ability to deal with stress. Of course, living with people can be stressful too. I think we all know that because we've all lived with other people, so that has its own form of stress. But these factors, the depression on the increase, antidepressant on the increase, the number of people living alone being really, really high. Since 1984, the number of people with no friends doubling. These factors lead us to a situation where when stressful things do occur, or when we encounter modern life with all of its complexity, we have less of those social connections that our ancestors had to sort of make sense of things, to sort of ground us, to sort of give us that sense of meaning, that sense of transcendence, okay? So this is obviously a very complex social problem, a very complex psychological, social, even theological problem, to where, you know, we're stuck in this sort of morass, this type of stress, almost like a banality type of stress, or a nihilism, where there's not a lot of meaning, there's not a lot of purpose, and people don't know how to make sense of things. That's a partial characteristic of the age we live in. There's been huge amounts of studies done on that. There's been huge amounts of books written on the subject. The most pivotal book ever written on stress is a book called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers by Robert Sapolsky. If you want to really learn and master stress, I recommend that book. It's an older book now, but it's been updated many times, and it's considered the Bible of stress and how stress works and what it does to the body. And to the author's credit, in the latter part of the book, he does dive into that. He dives into coping and how social connections are one of the most, if not the most important thing when it comes to managing stress. If you take a look at, okay, what are the most stressful events that people go through? I mean, think about, well, if you look at the research, most of those things, I'll read some of these off. The death of a spouse, marital separation, imprisonment, death of a close family member, personal injury or illness, marriage, job loss, marital reconciliation, retirement, and then, kind of comically, considering I do this professionally, public speaking. So those are some of the most stressful events that people go through. And I think what's fascinating about that is that most of those things are what we call chronic stressors. Those are chronic stressors. And those are the most dangerous. Those are the most dangerous. Now, if someone breaks into your home, that's very, very stressful. But, you know, thankfully you didn't get hurt. And guess what? It's over. It's over within an hour. And you go back to what? You go back to normal, okay? The most stressful things in life are things that are chronic. Drip, 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 drip. Every day, okay? Now, what if you're having marital problems? That's a chronic stressor. Sometimes these things can go on for years, okay? And this can take its toll on your psychological, spiritual, emotional, physical health. So chronic stressors are the most impactful. Those are the ones we want to be concerned with the most, because those go on for long periods of time in many cases. What is stress? I think the simplest way to think about stress is to think about a thermostat. Okay, think about a thermostat. A thermostat, if you set it to say 72, a comfortable temperature for most people, if it gets too hot, it comes back down. If it gets too cold, it raises up some. Okay, so if you set your thermostat at 72, if it's 90 outside, that system is going to work to keep everything in what we call homeostasis in the body, that is. So your body has a way to sort of regulate its internal stress temperature, if you will, to keep yourself from becoming too revved up or too revved down, okay? And you don't want to be either one of those things, you know. You don't want to lose that balance between not enough stress and too much stress, okay? Actually, not having any stress is just as bad as having too much, okay? Because if you have no stress, then you start to get depressed. You start to feel like your life has no purpose, no meaning. So we need challenges. The 4 keys to happiness, Dr. Robert Spitzer. 4 keys to happiness are what? Pleasure at the bottom. Those are the most immediate things. Just doing pleasurable things. Achieving things. Doing acts of kindness. Doing charity. Doing things for other people. And then lastly, contemplating the ultimate good. So when we look at negative sort of lack of stress in our lives, if we're not achieving anything, we're not going out and doing good things for the community, that sort of thing, we're not getting that positive type of stress in our lives, positive pleasures even. Okay, so we have to have some stimulation. But that chronic disruption of the thermostat, the body's thermostat, which is controlled by hormones in the body, that is the most dangerous type of stress because it can go on for days, maybe years. Someone who has a really bad marriage, for example, that would be like that thermostat being set at 80 degrees for years. It could take its toll on the house. Mold could develop. The house might not smell very good, so on and so forth. But we want to keep that stress thermostat in check. And when we're stressed out on a chronic basis, we get the activation of a hormone called cortisol. And cortisol is huge because cortisol, it wreaks havoc on your body. It's what we call the fight or flight hormone. The reason we call cortisol the fight or flight hormone is because when we receive stress, when we receive some sort of stimulus, let's say it's an argument, we get a boost in that fight or flight hormone, okay? Now, it's an old hormone, animals have it too, but it's basically a hormone that is just revving up the body, revving up that thermostat to fight, in this case, in the example of the argument, or flight, to leave. So argue or leave, fight or flight. And so cortisol is a fight or flight hormone. When you're stressed out, cortisol goes up. That's why we call it the fight or flight hormone. And now you get it. Let's say you do public speaking. You'll get it when you do public speaking. You'll get a boost in cortisol. But guess what? When the speech is over, it comes back down. You get it when you exercise. But exercise is very healthy because when you're done exercising, it comes back down. And exercise has so many other good benefits. So stress, just look at it like that. Look at it as a disruption of that thermostat. Look at it as a disruption of that thermostat. Stress is really about control, coping, being able to deal with a disruption in that homeostasis, that balance level. If we can deal with that, then we can deal with stress, okay? And that's what we're going to learn to do in the next video. Thank you. I will see you again soon. ScottGodwin.net